I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room, the faint smell of antiseptic clinging to the air, when my phone buzzed with a call that tore my world apart. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the worn magazines on the table beside me fluttered as a passing nurse stirred the air. My daughter, Emily, her voice sharp as a winter wind slicing through bare trees, said, "Mom, we're moving to Paris tomorrow. I sold your lake house and your car to fund it. We needed the cash. Goodbye." The line went dead, her words echoing in my ears like a slammed door. 42 years of pouring my heart into raising her, of sacrificing every spare moment and dollar, and she discarded me like an old receipt, crumpled and forgotten. I clutched the armrest of the stiff plastic chair, my knuckles whitening, but as the shock settled, a quiet resolve stirred within me, like embers catching in dry wood, because there was something Emily didn't know. My name is Margaret Ellis, and I'm 68 years old. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel and join me for more stories like this one. I thought I knew my daughter, but that call changed everything, like a photograph fading in sunlight, revealing a stranger beneath. I'd been a widow for 8 months, ever since my husband, Thomas, died suddenly from a stroke during our morning coffee ritual. The kitchen had smelled of roasted beans and his aftershave, the soft clink of our mugs a comforting rhythm. He'd handed me my coffee, his calloused fingers brushing mine, and smiled, saying, "You're my everything, Maggie." Those were his last words before he collapsed, the mug shattering on the tile. Emily had seemed so supportive afterward, her visits frequent, her arms around me as we sorted through Thomas's clothes, her voice gentle as she insisted I see a doctor for a checkup. "Mom, you've got to take care of yourself now," she'd say, her smile warm as summer light, or so I thought. Now, I saw it was a mask, as thin as the frost on our windows that winter. The lake house was our sanctuary, a cedar-sided cottage Thomas and I bought when Emily was 12. Every penny scraped from our modest salaries as a teacher and a librarian. The air there always carried the scent of pine and water, the deck creaking under our footsteps as we hosted barbecues and birthday parties. Emily's laughter would echo across the lake as she splashed with friends, later bringing her husband, Daniel, to share in those golden summers. I'd bustle in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, wiping counters, cherishing every moment as our family's heartbeat pulsed through that house. And the car, Thomas's 1998 Chevy pickup, polished to a gleam every Sunday, parked under the sprawling oak in our driveway, still held the faint musk of his pipe tobacco, as if he might climb in and drive home. Emily knew what that truck meant to me, how I'd run my hand along its door, feeling him in the cold metal. How could she sell it? In that sterile waiting room surrounded by the soft coughs of strangers and the hum of a flickering fluorescent bulb, I didn't cry. My hands rested in my lap, fingers tracing the worn seam of my coat, and a strange calm settled over me, like the stillness of the lake at dawn when the world holds its breath. I remembered something I'd buried in my grief, a small locked box Thomas had given me 2 weeks before he died. We'd been in the living room, the fire crackling, casting shadows on his lined face. "Maggie, keep this safe," he'd said, his eyes serious, almost urgent. "Open it when you're ready, but not before." I'd tucked it into my nightstand, too consumed by loss to think of it again. Now it called to me, a whisper of hope in the chaos. The nurse called my name, her voice cutting through my thoughts. The doctor's office smelled of rubbing alcohol, and his stethoscope was cold against my skin as he pronounced me healthy for my age. "Just reduce stress, Mrs. Ellis," he said, his pen scratching notes. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, fixed on that box. Outside, the autumn air bit at my cheeks, the leaves crunching underfoot as I walked to the bus stop. Emily had sold my car, after all. The city blurred past the bus window, the hum of the engine a dull roar, and I felt a spark of something new, a flicker of defiance. Emily thought she'd left me with nothing, but Thomas had always planned for the future. I was about to uncover his final gift. At home, the house was quiet. the familiar creak of the floorboards grounding me as I moved to the bedroom. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet in my dresser, a gift from Thomas years ago. The nightstand drawer slid open with a soft scrape, revealing the small metal box, its lock glinting in the lamplight. My hands trembled as I retrieved the key from Thomas's old watch case, its leather worn from years of use. I sat on our bed, the quilt soft under my fingers, and opened the box. Inside was a letter in Thomas's precise handwriting and a stack of documents, neatly folded. My breath caught as I read, "My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I kept this secret to protect you from worry. Our savings weren't just in the bank. I invested in properties and stocks over the years. You're not just comfortable, you're wealthy. The lake house, the car, and more are yours. The details are in these papers. Use them wisely. I love you always, Thomas." Tears pricked my eyes, blurring his words. The documents listed ownership of 4 properties: the lake house, the downtown condo where Emily and Daniel lived, a small rental cottage upstate, and a commercial lot. Bank statements showed accounts with balances I couldn't fathom. $2.3 million in one alone, dated September 10, 2025. Thomas, a high school math teacher with chalk-dusted hands, had been a silent investor, turning our frugal life into a fortune. He'd hidden it to keep Emily grounded, to ensure she loved us for us, not our wealth. The irony was bitter as bile. She'd sold what she thought was mine, not knowing I owned far more. My fingers traced his signature, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice, steady and warm, urging me forward. I didn't sleep that night. I wandered our small house, the floor cool against my bare feet. Touching the worn furniture Emily always called outdated, the oak table where we'd shared meals, the armchair where Thomas read his mysteries. I lingered over photos on the mantel, Emily at 5, her gap-toothed grin beaming from Thomas's shoulders as they built a sand castle at the lake. When had that girl become the woman who'd betrayed me? The question gnawed at me, heavy as the silence in the house. The next morning my phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet. It was Emily, her tone softer but guarded, like someone testing thin ice. "Mom, just checking in. We transferred your share of the sale, $77,400 for the house and car. It's in your account. It'll tide you over until you find something smaller. We're boarding soon, so I'll call when we land in Paris." "Your share?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger curling in my chest. "Yeah, Mom, 30%. Fair, right? Daniel's got a business deal in Paris that'll set us up. We'll be gone 6 months, maybe more. Don't worry. We'll help you find a little place when we're back." Her condescension stung, each word a needle. I gripped the phone, my knuckles tight, but kept my tone even. "When do you leave?" "This afternoon." "Love you, Mom." She hung up and I laughed, a sharp, raw sound that echoed in the empty kitchen. She thought she'd given me crumbs from my own table, funding her adventure with my memories. Days later, still reeling from Emily's call, I checked my bank account and saw the transfer, realizing the sale had already happened without my knowledge. The screen's glow was harsh in the dim light, $77,400, 30% of the lake house's $250,000 value, and the car's $8,000. Emily and Daniel sold them quickly, desperate for cash to fund their Paris plans. From my window, I watched them load their designer luggage into a taxi, Emily's laughter floating up as Daniel kissed her cheek. They never glanced at my house, never said goodbye, their figures shrinking as the cab pulled away. I spread Thomas's documents on the kitchen table, the papers crinkling under my fingers, and sipped tea, the steam warm against my lips. I could sue for fraud, the sale was illegal, but that felt too blunt, too final. Emily needed to learn what she'd thrown away, not just be punished for it. I called Miss Laura Bennett, Thomas's estate lawyer, her card still pinned to the fridge from the funeral. "Mrs. Ellis, good to hear from you," she said, her voice warm as a hearth. "How can I assist?" "I found some documents from Thomas. Can we meet tomorrow? It's urgent, of course. 10 a.m. at my office." That night, I dreamed of Thomas, sitting in his armchair, grading papers, the scratch of his pen a soft rhythm. The firelight danced on his glasses as he looked up, eyes twinkling. Time to take charge, Maggie. I woke with purpose, a fire I hadn't felt in years, burning away the fog of grief. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy dress Thomas loved, its fabric soft against my skin, and pinned my hair with a silver clip he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. Miss Bennett's office was downtown, a sleek space with glass walls and polished wood, smelling faintly of leather and coffee. She reviewed the documents, her eyes widening, her pen pausing mid-note. Margaret, this is extraordinary. Thomas was brilliant. You own properties worth over $4 million, plus liquid assets. The condo where Emily lives? It's yours, held under Ellis Holdings, LLC. The lake house sale was fraudulent. She had no legal right. Can we reverse it quietly? I asked, my voice steady, though my heart raced. Yes, and the car too. The power of attorney she used was likely signed under duress or deception. We can nullify both sales and transfer full control of your assets to you. It'll take a few weeks. Do it. But keep it secret for now. She nodded, her eyes sharp with curiosity. What's your plan? I want Emily to learn what family means, not through punishment, but through consequences. For the next month, I lived a double life. To the world, I was Margaret, the grieving widow, scraping by, my cardigan frayed at the cuffs, my smile polite but tired. But in private, I was a woman reclaiming her power, studying Thomas's investments, learning the language of deeds and trusts. Miss Bennett worked swiftly, calling with updates as I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking softly. I kept up appearances, chatting with neighbors like Mrs. Clara Reed, who'd stop me on my morning walks, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. Margaret, how are you managing alone? I heard Emily left for Europe. Yes, she and Daniel have plans there, I'd say, smiling as I adjusted my scarf. I'm fine, Clara. She'd pat my hand, her pity warm but heavy. If you need anything, you let me know. I'd nod, but inside, I was orchestrating something bigger, each step deliberate as a chess move. One morning, Miss Bennett called, her voice crisp. The lake house is yours again. The buyers were unaware of the fraud and returned it after a refund. The car's trickier, the buyers resisting, but I'm working on it. And the condo? You've always owned it through the LLC. We're finalizing your direct control. 2 more weeks. I visited the lake house that weekend, taking a bus to the quiet shore, the air sharp with salt and pine. The cedar-sided cottage stood unchanged, its deck overlooking the water, the garden I'd tended still blooming with late roses. I sat on a bench across the street, the wood cold under my hands, memories flooding back. Emily learning to swim, her squeals mingling with the lapping waves. Thomas grilling burgers, the smoky scent drifting. Our last Christmas there in 2023, fairy lights twinkling in the snow. A neighbor, an older man with a weathered cap, approached. You okay, ma'am? Just reminiscing. I knew the owners. Sad story. They said the old lady was sick, needed to sell fast. Turns out it wasn't legal. We got our money back. But it's a shame. I nodded, hiding my smile, though my chest tightened. Emily had lied about my health, painting me as frail to justify her betrayal. When I returned home that evening, I called Miss Bennett, my voice firm. Get the car back no matter what it takes. It's complicated. Emily used a power of attorney from January 2025, signed in a moment of extreme grief shortly before Thomas's death. You may have been too grief-stricken to notice. I remembered those days, Emily bringing papers to the house, her voice soft as she said they were for the estate. I'd signed without reading, my eyes blurred with tears, trusting her completely. My mistake. Prove it was deception, I said. I want everything back. Weeks passed and Emily's silence was deafening. No calls, no texts from Paris. The house felt emptier without her chatter, but I filled it with purpose, poring over Thomas's documents, learning the weight of his legacy. Then Clara burst in one afternoon, her eyes wide, her coat unbuttoned. Margaret, word is Daniel's in trouble. My cousin at the bank says he took loans against the condo, but it's not his. Emily's coming back to sort it out. Really? I said, stirring my tea, my voice calm despite the thrill in my veins. Yes, and Daniel lied about the Paris deal. It was a scam to dodge his debts. That night I sat on my porch, the stars bright above, their light cold and distant. Thomas used to say they were our ancestors watching over us, their glow a quiet promise. You planned this perfectly, I whispered to him, my breath fogging in the chill. Miss Bennett called the next morning. Emily landed at JFK alone. Daniel stayed in Paris. The eviction notice for the condo is ready, 30 days to vacate. It was delivered today. Perfect. Don't tell her it's from me. Emily called the next day, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. Mom, something's wrong. I got an eviction notice for the condo. It's from some company, Thomas Enterprises, LLC. Do you know anything about it? No, honey. That's odd. Have you checked if it's legitimate? I'm trying, but Daniel left me, Mom. He ran off with some model in Paris. I'm alone, and now this. Can I come see you? Of course, honey. Come home. She arrived that evening looking like a ghost of herself. Pale, thin, her designer coat wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed. The porch light cast harsh shadows on her face as she hesitated at the door. Mom, she said, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry for how I left. Come in. Emily, let's have tea. The kettle whistled softly, a familiar comfort. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Thomas and I had planned our life, the wood worn smooth by years of meals and laughter. Emily looked small, broken, her hands fidgeting with her mug. Daniel lied about everything, she said, her voice barely audible. The Paris deal, the loans, $150,000 in debt, some in my name. He forged my signature. Now I'm evicted, jobless, with nothing. I leaned forward, my hands steady around my tea. I'm so sorry, honey. What's next? I don't know. Can I stay here for a while? Just until I get back on my feet. Her eyes searched mine, pleading, and I felt a pang of love tangled with resolve. This is your home, Emily. She hugged me, her tears soaking my shoulder, her body trembling. I hugged back, but my mind was on the next step. She needed to hit rock bottom before she could rise, to feel the weight of her choices. Emily moved in the next day, her belongings fitting into one suitcase, a stark contrast to the lavish life she'd chased. She slept in her old room, the walls still papered with faded band posters from her teenage years, the air heavy with the scent of old books. I watched her unpack each item, worn shoes, a creased blouse, a reminder of her fall. Mom, I found this in the condo, she said, holding a small envelope with my name in Thomas's handwriting. It was in Daniel's desk. My heart skipped, but I kept my face neutral. Let's see it. Inside was a key and a note. Maggie, if Emily's with you, she's in trouble. This key opens Safety Deposit Box 392 at First National Bank, dated March 1st, 2025. Use it to guide her back. Love, Thomas. A safety deposit box? Emily said, eyes wide, a flicker of hope in her voice. Dad never mentioned this, nor to me. Should we check it? Yes, Mom. Maybe it's something to help us. Her voice trembled with desperation, and I nodded, letting her cling to that hope. The next morning, we went to the bank, the marble floors cool underfoot, the air sharp with the scent of polished wood. The clerk opened box 392, revealing a sapphire necklace, a gold watch, and a letter valuing them at $120,000. Emily's eyes lit up, her fingers brushing the jewels. Mom, we could sell these. It'd cover some of Daniel's debts. Are you sure? These are family heirlooms. My voice was soft, but I watched her closely, noting the hunger in her gaze. I have no choice. The bank's threatening to seize everything. Her hands shook as she lifted the necklace, the sapphires catching the light. I let her believe it, watching her calculate her escape over the next week. She researched jewelers, her desperation palpable as she paced the living room, muttering figures under her breath. I can get $100,000, she said, spreading the pieces on the table, the clink of metal sharp in the quiet. It'll pay the urgent loans, a loan of $85,000 due November 1st, 2025. Think carefully. Emily, once they're gone, they're gone. I sipped my tea, my heart heavy but resolute. I know, Mom, but I'm drowning. Her voice broke, and for a moment, I wanted to tell her everything, to ease her pain. But I held back. Miss Bennett called that night, her voice low and urgent. We've traced Daniel. He's in Paris, attempting a sham marriage for residency. We have proof he forged Emily's signature. She's clear of his debts. Don't tell her yet. Finalize it first. I hung up, staring at the stars through the window, their light a quiet reminder of Thomas's presence. Emily sold the jewels, paying off the most pressing loans. She took a night job cleaning offices, her hands raw from bleach, her face drawn with exhaustion. It's humiliating, she told me one evening, collapsing into a chair, the scent of cleaning solution clinging to her clothes. But it's honest. Mrs. Carter, my co-worker, says it's better than begging. You're doing what you have to, I said, pride swelling despite my silence about my role. She was learning, slowly, painfully. Clara visited one afternoon, eyeing Emily's work boots by the door, their soles worn thin. Margaret, is Emily really cleaning offices? After Paris? Her voice was a mix of shock and pity, her hands clutching her purse. She's finding her way, I said, pouring her tea. The steam curling in the air. She's changed, humbler. I saw her helping Mrs. Carter with groceries yesterday, using her own money. Clara's eyes softened and I nodded, hiding the spark of satisfaction in my chest. Emily was learning, but the final lesson was coming. Miss Bennett called 3 weeks later. Everything's ready. Emily's free of the debts, and you have full control of your assets. The car's back too. The buyer settled for $10,000. I ran my hand along the Chevy's door, the familiar musk of Thomas's pipe tobacco flooding back, a bittersweet relief washing over me. Set a meeting for Friday. It's time. I told Emily we were seeing a lawyer about her debts. She arrived at Miss Bennett's office, nervous in her too large blazer, the fabric swallowing her thin frame. Miss Bennett handed her a folder, her voice calm. These prove Daniel's fraud. You're not liable for his $150,000 in debts. Emily's jaw dropped, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. Who paid for this? I took a breath, the air thick with anticipation. I did, Emily. Your father left me more than you know. Miss Bennett slid another folder across the desk, revealing the deeds, the accounts, the truth. I owned the condo, the lake house, everything. Emily's face crumpled, tears spilling as she read. You knew? When I sold your house? When I begged to stay with you? Yes. My voice was steady, but my heart ached at her pain. Why didn't you tell me? Her words were a whisper, raw and broken, because you needed to learn what family means. You sold my memories, Emily, but worse, you threw away our bond. I let you struggle so you'd understand. I reached for her hand, but she pulled back, her eyes searching mine. I treated you like nothing, and you saved me anyway. Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her cheeks. I saved you by letting you save yourself. My words were gentle but firm, the weight of them settling between us. Miss Bennett added, Your mother recovered the lake house and car. You're free. Emily kept her cleaning job, her voice quiet but resolute. It reminds me who I am now. Months later, she enrolled in community college, studying counseling to help women in crisis, her textbooks scattered across the kitchen table. We turned the lake house into a shelter for domestic violence survivors, using my foundation's funds. One evening on the lake house deck, the air cool with the scent of water in pine, Emily said, I'm sorry for reducing this place to dollars. Dad's here, in the creak of the floor, the smell of the lake. He's proud of you, I said, my hand resting on hers, the warmth of her skin grounding me. I want to make this house a home for others. Mom, like you and Dad did. We sat watching the sunset, the water lapping gently, its rhythm a quiet heartbeat. We did it, Thomas, I whispered to the stars, their light soft and eternal. Justice wasn't revenge, it was transformation. Emily and I were partners now, bound by respect, not just blood. What did you think of my story? Have you faced betrayal and found redemption? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If my journey moved you, subscribe and stay for the next story. You're not alone.